Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, Israel is prepared to return to war in Gaza if Hamas does not agree to new ceasefire terms. Plus, drawing on his own prison experience in Turkey, Pastor Andrew Brunson on what the Gaza hostages have gone through. And becoming a pariah in the world of higher education, Gil Troy describes today's academic intifada. And former Disney star Zach Sage undercover in the wild, wild West Bank. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl. Israel has halted all humanitarian aid into Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu cited Hamas's practice of stealing supplies to finance its terror machine. Hamas continues to reject a U.S.-backed ceasefire plan that would free the remaining hostages in 2 phases. Here's the latest. U.S. Mideast envoy Steve Witkoff has put forth a plan that would extend the ceasefire in Gaza another few weeks and free the rest of the hostages over time. Israel signed on, but not Hamas.
In Witkoff's plan, half of the hostages would be released right away, and the remaining half would be released if we reach an agreement on a permanent ceasefire. Again, Israel has accepted this plan, I accepted this plan, but so far, Hamas has rejected it.
As a result, Israel is cutting off all aid and goods going into Gaza. Israeli officials say that during the ceasefire, more than 21,000 aid trucks entered the Gaza Strip, enough to last 4 to 6 months if Hamas distributes the supplies fairly. But with the militant group controlling the flow of resources, Israel says it can no longer risk sustaining what it calls a terror machine. The U.S. backs cutting off the aid.
We've done that because Hamas steals the supplies and prevents the people of Gaza from getting them. It uses these supplies to finance its terror machine, which is aimed directly at Israel and our civilians, and this we cannot accept.
If Hamas doesn't start to compromise, Israel's planning to go to all-out war to wipe out the terror group in Gaza and has authorized the mobilization of up to 400,000 reservists through May 2025. Top Israeli conservatives cheered Netanyahu's new, tougher stance. Former National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir tweeted, "This should be the policy until the last hostage is returned. Now is the time to open the gates of hell, cut off electricity and water, return to war." To aid Israel in its fight against Hamas and Iran's other proxies, the Trump administration is speeding up $4 billion worth of military sales to Israel. In expediting these sales, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says he's reversing moves by the Biden administration to slow-walk weapons deliveries to Israel. Recently freed hostage Eli Sharabi has been speaking out on Hamas atrocities against their captives.
In the worst times, what do you eat?
In the worst times, you eat once a day a bowl of pasta.
And that's all the food you get for the day?
It's about 250 to 300 calories.
A day?
A day, which is a tenth of what I need.
In response to that video, President Trump has invited Sharabi and other freed hostages to meet with him at the White House this Tuesday. Meanwhile, a terrorist killed at least 1 Israeli and wounded several others in a knife attack in Haifa this morning.
Hamas rejected Israel's offer to extend the first phase of the ceasefire over accusations of breaking previous agreements. That rejection led to tough talk from Israeli leadership. Netanyahu and his government say they will not negotiate on Hamas terms and will continue to use all means necessary to pressure the terror group.
I say to Hamas, if you don't release our hostages, there will be consequences you can't imagine.
Defense Minister Israel Katz promised a return to military action if Hamas does not comply.
If Hamas does not release the hostages soon, the gates of Gaza will be locked and the gates of hell will open. We will return to fighting and they will encounter the IDF with might and in ways they have never known. Until complete victory, we will never allow Hamas to control Gaza.
As the threat of escalation grows, Netanyahu reached out to a former hostage with a message of regret. The call comes amid growing criticism from hostage families who say the government's not doing enough to bring their loved ones home.
I understand the enormity of the loss. It's a terrible thing. I also want you to know that I am sorry that it took us so long. We fought hard to get you out, and your brother and the entire family fought hard too.
Arab states are scrambling to come up with their own plan to rebuild Gaza in response to President Trump's suggestion that the Palestinians should be relocated. Egypt proposed a plan seeking to remove Hamas from power and install an interim government backed by Arab states. But the plan leaves many questions unanswered, including who will govern and fund the reconstruction. Meanwhile, tensions continue to rise as Israel steps up military preparations. Troops remain on high alert, and residents of southern Israel brace for a possible escalation in the coming days. From Jerusalem, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Joining me now is Chuck Holton. Chuck, welcome back to Jerusalem, to Israel. And that was a great story you had there. We just want to know, what are you going to be doing this week?
Well, there's quite a bit going on. I'm going to start by going up to the north. Today is the day that they're allowing Israelis to go back to the north, those people who were pushed out of their homes, 60,000 people. And so want to see what they're planning to do to rebuild their lives up there in Kiryat Shimona and elsewhere along the Lebanese border. And then I'm going to go down to the south. Of course, we have all of the machinations happening in Gaza, whether or not they're going to go back to fighting. I'm told that there are something like 10 brigades surrounding Gaza right now, ready to go back in if that's what it requires. So we'll be doing some reporting on that. And also the real interesting story to me is the operation that the IDF has been conducting in Judea and Samaria and the Hebron. And during this ceasefire, a lot of people don't realize how much fighting has actually been going on in those West Bank areas. And so we're going to go talk to some of the people that have been involved there. And there is an organization that's putting together a training facility. They're going to be building a $7 million facility in Samaria to help Israelis who have gotten their permits to carry firearms to learn to protect themselves better. And one of the problems with you having 10,000 people that got new firearms permits is there's not a good place to train them. And so they're putting together this very modern, state-of-the-art facility where they can come and get first-class quality training to learn to protect themselves and their families and their communities in Judea and Samaria.
Well, Chuck, these all sound like really interesting stories. We look forward to hearing them from you this week. Take care. Be safe.
Okay.
Bless you. Thank you. Another important event happened this week. The passing of an honored Israeli statesman and ambassador, Dori Gold. He served as the Israeli ambassador to the UN and policy advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu. And he was an astute thinker and a great friend of CBN. We interviewed him dozens of times. May his memory be a blessing. Here's a clip from an interview with CBN founder Pat Robertson about his history of the UN Tower of Babel.
You also talked about the General Assembly, the people, these tiny little states, I forget the number, about 89 or so of them are ruled by dictators, and they spend probably a third of their time talking about Israel. What is it with the General Assembly?
Well, the General Assembly, when the UN was founded back in 1945, were a bunch of allies. If you wanted to join the UN in 1945, you had to declare war on the Axis powers, on Japan or on Germany. Today, you don't have allies, you have adversaries of the United States. You have mostly authoritarian regimes that are actually trying to rewrite the rules of the UN to serve their interests. You know, Yasser Arafat, in an interview back in the early 1970s, was asked about airplane hijacking. And he just changed the subject, and he said, well, you know, the UN resolutions and the UN Charter allow for fighting against occupation. So he used the rules of the UN and his interpretation of the UN in order to advance terrorism. That's not the way we create world order. That's the way we create world chaos, and that's what Tower of Babel is about.
Since October 7th, Hamas has exploited the Jewish culture's emphasis on life by using kidnapping as a psychological tactic of war. Pastor Andrew Brunson knows all about this jihadist mentality and spoke about it with Gary Lane recently on an episode of CBN's The Global Lane.
Uncertainty lies ahead as Phase 1 of the Gaza hostage ceasefire deal approaches its end. Israeli families are anxiously awaiting the return of the 63 remaining hostages. I recently spoke with Pastor Andrew Brunson, who spent 2 years in a Turkish prison before his release in 2018. He wrote about his experience in the book God's Hostage. What are your thoughts when you see these hostage families and you see the hostage release, and what would you like to see happen there?
When I see the reunions, it really moves me because I remember just the desperation, the desperate longing I had for freedom and to be with my family. And so then I see these people coming together after not knowing if they'll ever see each other again. And I know what they're feeling. Now, I also remember what broke me, because I did break in my imprisonment, and then God rebuilt me in my second year. But it's the uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen, if I would ever be released, the fear, which is very overwhelming, and also isolation. And I think those are the same things that many of them are experiencing. And I think especially uncertainty was devouring me. And it's very difficult to deal with not knowing what's going to happen, if you will ever get out, if you'll ever see your loved ones again, or if you'll die in that situation.
Well, how about these hostage families? I mean, it's got to be, look, these are God's chosen people. I don't know, some of them may be faithful. I'm sure many of them turned to God that time. Can you imagine what they're going through and what they're experiencing, not knowing, and maybe even blaming God? Is that something that happens? Do you blame God for what happens to you?
It's hard not to. And this is something that happens not only in desperate situations like imprisonment or being a hostage, but people go through this when they go into crisis. You know, we blame God. And especially for those of us who are believers, we say, God, why aren't you intervening? This is the problem of suffering, right? If God is all-powerful and he's loving. And I had to make a conscious decision to repeat again and again, no, God, you are faithful. You do love me, even if I don't feel it, even if I don't see it. You are good. You are true. And to say these things, even when my emotions are in turmoil and in darkness, but with my will, I can choose to speak what is true.
You worked 23 years in Turkey, 2 years in prison there, so I think you know the culture and the society very well. You probably are very familiar with Erdogan. He recently met with al-Jilani, the new leader of Syria. So what do you think he's up to? Does he want to reestablish an Ottoman Empire, or is he just trying to gain influence with Syria?
Well, I don't know that they can reestablish the Ottoman Empire, but certainly there is going to be influence. And I think we're going to see in the next years, especially with some decline in the U.S., just the geopolitical situation is going to change. And I think you'll see regional powers that are going to begin to exert themselves more. And Turkey is a regional power. It ruled the Middle East, North Africa, and the Balkans not so long ago. And so I think that remains there. They're starting to spread their influence into areas where they ruled before.
And then recently we saw King Abdullah of Jordan welcoming al-Jilani to Jordan. So what's going on here? Are we seeing a new alliance maybe of Jordan, Syria, and Turkey against Israel or against Iran?
My sense is that I think that Turkey, Russia, and Iran will move together in some alliance. I know that's counterintuitive. They generally have not been friends before. I had a dream about this in prison that was from God. I have very few dreams from God, but this was one. And I saw them moving in a dark alliance. This was in 2016, before they started to move together. And then it started to happen. And so I think there are spiritual ties there. So I don't know what will happen with Jordan. They're going to be under tremendous pressure right now. But I think there is an alliance that will continue in a darker direction, and that will it will eventually, in the end, try to undermine Israel, yes. I think we're just going into a more turbulent world. I think one of the things we do when we visit, because we're still involved in the Muslim world, and when I talk to Christians there, I say, I know that there's pressure now of persecution, but I'm sorry to say it's going to increase in the future. And this is because the West is pulling back from a value for religious freedom. Religious freedom is under pressure in the West itself, and so they're no longer going to defend it in other countries. And this means that pressure will rise in many places overseas.
Andrew Brunson, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
A liberal education used to be about the exploration of ideas by teachers and students coming from different perspectives. According to Jerusalem Post columnist Gil Troy, that approach has been replaced by more dogmatic thinking. Here's his conversation with our Middle East correspondent, Paul Strand.
We're speaking with Professor Gil Troy, author of the new book, To Resist the Academic Intifada. Gil, your new book shows many professors and students these days aren't just demonizing Israel, but America and Europe as well. What's the root and the reason behind all this?
If you notice, at every anti-Israel demonstration, they burn the American flag or the Canadian flag or the British flag. The messaging is very clear. Why we're missing it is the shocker. And the root of it is, I'm sorry to say, Karl Marx. It really goes down to the Karl Marx approach, which is the world is divided into oppressed and oppressor. And so you use words like settler colonialism to basically say, the Americans, the Jews, the Zionists, the Europeans are oppressors. How do you learn if you can't appreciate some of the good? How do you learn if you say, okay, we've sometimes made mistakes historically, but I'm not stuck in the 1800s. I'm not stuck in 1943. I'm here in 2025 doing my best and learning.
Do you think there's a reason that this is caught on so much on campuses specifically?
Look, it's a story that's been building for many years. In the 1970s, they started with identity politics. And all of a sudden, rather than judging people, as Martin Luther King said, by the content of our character, we were judged, as the racists did, by the color of our skin and by our, what they call gender. Then, the collapse of the Soviet Union. And so you no longer had the traditional socialism and Marxism holding the left together. What became the new glue? Palestinianism. And at the core of Palestinianism is an ideology that hates democracy, hates liberalism, hates Americanism, and hates Zionism, and hates Western civilization. And so it became the core ideology of so many people, especially, I'm sorry to say, in my world, of the humanists, of sociology, of history, of anthropology. And think of parents paying $86,400 a year in some of the fanciest universities in the world to send their kids to be propagandized against the very skills that those kids need in order to get back and raise their kids so that they can go to those same universities. It's insane.
What's the ultimate danger if this anti-Western campaign just keeps growing and growing?
If you keep on following their words, their books, who gets tenured, you'd say it's time for us to just sort of close up shop. How do we continue to grow? How do we continue to progress? I always say, I don't understand. I grew up in a world where progressives believed in progress and conservatives conserved institutions. Progressives who say, oh no, we're stuck, who don't tell the story of Martin Luther King when they talk about race, who don't tell the story of Betty Friedan when they talk about feminism, who pretend that we're still stuck in the era of slavery, who pivot the story of America, not around 1776 with all those high ideals, but around 1619, the arrival of the first slave ship. What they're doing is they're telling our students, be depressed. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book, because I'm a child of hope. You're a child of hope. America is about hope. And to feel the despair on campuses, on these beautiful green campuses, to feel the despair in our most elegant and elaborate and wealthy corners of America said to me, there's a problem here. Despair doesn't help. Hope solves.
You know, you say that on today's woke campuses, you'd for sure be canceled and fired. Why is that? Why you?
I made a mistake. I grew up believing in America, believing the American dream, believing in Israel, believing in Zionism, believing in Judaism, believing in the Judeo-Christian ethic, believing in the West. And even 23 years ago, when I first made another mistake and stood up and said, this is unacceptable, because I could already see it then. And I stood up for Israel and Zionism when they were blowing up buses in the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. I started becoming a pariah. In those days, they just kind of kept their distance from you. These days, they literally cancel you on social media. And more recently, people have been physically attacked, harassed, threatened on a campus. We're supposed to be about ideas. And we're supposed to say, wait a minute, if I disagree with you, can I learn from you rather than canceling you? It's an assault on the values of academia and the values of America.
Well, I'm glad you haven't been fired. We've been speaking with Gil Troy, author of the new book, To Resist the Academic Intifada. Thanks, Gil.
Thank you.
Zach Sage has gone from being a successful teenage Disney star to creating digital content highlighting anti-Semitism. He spoke with our bureau chief, Chris Mitchell, recently about his undercover reporting from Palestinian areas.
Zach Sage, thanks for joining us on Jerusalem Dateline. You know, you're kind of a wild guy on YouTube and Instagram. Tell us about the videos that you do. And the one I want to know about is the Wild, Wild West Bank. Tell us about that.
Yes, I'm definitely a little crazy. I've been running around with a microphone and a camera since I was 13, 14 years old. I was an early YouTube pioneer. It started from running around my high school with a camera and a microphone all the way to West Bank.
Are you supportive of Hamas?
Yes.
Yes, of course.
Yes. Are most Palestinians?
Yeah.
Palestinian people like Hamas.
I'm with the resistance.
Did you see the videos they posted of what they did on October 7th?
Everything.
And you're okay with all that?
With everything they did.
Do you want to live with the Israelis in peace? Or
No, I want one state solution. No Israel.
So no more Israel?
Yes.
Israel wiped off the map?
Palestine فقط.
We should delete Israel.
So you would not be okay with a two-state solution?
Of course not.
You know, I think the shocking thing about that report was just how much pro-Hamas sentiment there was. I think we've sort of accepted it now, but back when I was there over the summer, it was kind of a big mystery. There was really only some surveys that had come out that showed a high support for Hamas in the West Bank, but I was really the first person that was willing to actually sneak in there with the camera crew and go in and get the right footage. I say sneak in because, one, Israelis can't go. I'm not Israeli. I'm an American Jew, but I've been told that even if your name sounds Jewish, they really advise you not to enter. Luckily for me, my legal name is Zach Sage Fox, and so that sort of saved the day. I was able to say I was Italian, and I got snuck in with a Muslim film crew. So, and that's the rest is history.
Jews have not been killed or exposed to any struggle or any violence.
Not almost every country in the Middle East.
No.
That's true.
Educate yourself.
I just did my first undercover report, actually, in the UK in London.
Tell us about your undercover work there in UK. What did you find out?
It was really fascinating. You know, the support for Hamas and other terrorist groups was much more out in the open. In Britain, almost no one had their face covered. People were just openly supporting terrorist groups and openly saying awful things about Jews. I caught a 17-year-old girl on camera saying that the Jews should go to hell. I mean, straight up, the Jews should go to hell. You'll see this in the video. 17-year-old girl. And the most mind-blowing part was her family was all right there. You think they would have pulled her away from the camera after. They let me talk to her for another 5 minutes or so. Like even her adult family members didn't think that this was messed up. And it goes to show you that the government in the UK is so lax about this type of hate and this type of clear support for terrorism that people feel emboldened to just talk about it and to support terror.
Yeah, I would agree. So I've been watching some of your videos. How can people find about you? And if they don't know already, how can they find you? YouTube, Instagram, and any other platform?
Yeah, you can follow me at Zach Sage Fox. I'm doing some really awesome content and really in my Borat undercover era. I just went undercover at Jewish Voices for Peace, Cornell Shabbat, to really shed light on what the very small but loud minority of anti-Israel Jews are doing. And I also went undercover at Columbia. That's coming out in the next few weeks. So really some big exposés that I would love for your audience to follow, as well as some of these bigger projects I'm working on to really unite the world around and against anti-Semitism.
Well, Zach Sage, great to be with you. Thanks for joining us. Kol hakavod, as they say in Israel, and thanks for all the work you do.
Thank you so much. You too, man. And yeah, peace. Have me on whenever you guys want.
That's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and you can access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. Please keep praying for the hostages still being held in Gaza, that they would all come home soon. And join us in praying for the peace of Jerusalem, that no weapon formed against Israel would prosper. Remember, the God who watches over Israel and you and me neither slumbers nor sleeps. I'm Julie Stahl. For all of us here at the Jerusalem Bureau, we'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.